At first glance, it looked almost ridiculous. Tiago was standing near the edge of a busy street when he noticed the bird. Small, dark, and sharply alert, it hopped onto the asphalt with a nut in its beak, dropped it deliberately in the road, and then flew back to the curb as if it knew exactly what would happen next. Cars rolled forward. Tires passed over the nut. Then, the instant the lane cleared, the bird darted down, collected the broken shell, and ate. Tiago blinked, then laughed under his breath. "No way," he muttered, half to himself and half to the stranger nearby. But the person beside him barely looked up. "Just instinct," he said, as if that explained everything. That answer should have settled it. It didn't, because the bird came back. Not once, not randomly, again and again over the course of the week, always choosing the same stretch of road, always waiting with eerie patience at the exact moment the traffic slowed. Tiago began noticing details he hadn't seen before. The bird didn't drop the nut just anywhere. It chose a place near the crossing, where cars would compress into a predictable rhythm. It waited through red lights. It stayed still when pedestrians passed too close. And when the light changed, it timed its movements with uncanny precision, as if it had learned the city's pulse. The more Tiago watched, the less instinct sounded like an explanation. One afternoon, the bird nearly miscalculated. A car moved faster than expected, forcing it to lift off at the last second. Tiago felt his chest tighten. He expected the bird to give up, maybe abandon the nut and disappear. Instead, it returned later and changed its method. It waited longer. It chose a different angle. It became more cautious, more selective, almost as if it had updated its own rulebook after a mistake. Then something else happened. A man walking by noticed the nut, stepped in, and tried to snatch it from the ground. The bird froze at a distance, watching. It did not rush in. It did not panic. It waited until the human left, then moved only when the timing was safe again. No drama, no noise, just a quiet recalculation. By then, Tiago wasn't watching a bird anymore. He was watching a mind at work. And the strangest part was this: the bird didn't seem lucky. It seemed informed, as if it understood that pressure could break a shell, that movement could create opportunity, that patience could be a tool just as powerful as a beak. If a bird can do that in the middle of a city, in plain view of everyone, what else have we been calling instinct, when it might actually be something far more intelligent? Tiago started showing up earlier each day, long before the traffic thickened and the street began to hum with its usual impatience. From the sidewalk, he watched the same small bird return to the same patch of asphalt, carrying a nut in its beak as if it had done this 100 times before. It would pause, tilt its head, and look not at the nut, but at the road, at the rhythm of the cars, at the narrow spaces between motion and stillness. Then, with a quick flick, it would drop the nut precisely where the tires would crush it. At first, it seemed almost accidental, but the bird did not linger randomly. It waited. It watched. And when the light changed, it moved. Tiago heard people behind him laugh softly. "Instinct," one man said, without even looking up from his phone. Another shrugged. "Birds are smarter than we think, I guess." But Tiago kept his eyes on the bird. There was something in the timing that felt too deliberate to dismiss. The bird wasn't just surviving near the road. It was reading it. On the third day, Tiago saw the first mistake. The bird dropped a nut too close to the curb, and before the car could pass, a skateboarder reached down and snatched it. The bird did not panic. It leapt back, stayed still, and waited from a safer distance. Minutes later, when the street cleared again, it returned to the exact spot and dropped another nut. No flurry, no wasted movement. Just adjustment. As if the setback had been filed away and turned into new information. That was the moment the whole scene changed for him. This was not a simple routine. It was learning in real time. Birds, scientists have found, are capable of far more than people once believed. Some can solve puzzles, use tools, and remember where and when food appears. Others learn by watching what works and what fails. They may not understand traffic lights the way humans do, but they can detect patterns. Pressure breaks shells. Pauses create safety. Timing means survival. Tiago leaned against the railing, silent, feeling the city around him transform into something stranger and more intelligent. The bird returned again and again, never hurried, never reckless, as if it had mapped the street in its own mind. And when Tiago finally stepped closer, thinking maybe he could help. Maybe he could guide it to a safer place. The bird only glanced at him once and kept its distance. It didn't need rescuing. It was already one step ahead. And that raised the real question. How much of this was instinct, and how much of it was strategy? Tiago started returning to the same stretch of road every day, notebook in hand, as if he were tracking a suspect instead of a bird. The scene never looked the same twice, yet the pattern held. The bird would arrive with a nut, scan the asphalt, and wait near the curb until the traffic softened into a brief, dangerous calm. Then it would drop the nut, step back, and watch the cars roll over it. Only after the crunch of the shell and the reset of the light did it descend, quick and precise, to collect the reward. At first, people walking by laughed at him. "It's just instinct," one man said, without even slowing down. But Tiago kept watching, and the longer he watched, the less random it seemed. The bird did not simply repeat a habit. It adjusted. One afternoon, a cyclist passed too close and startled it before the nut was crushed. The bird flew to a nearby wire, waited far longer than usual, and only returned when the road opened again. Another time, when a passerby reached down as if to grab the nut, the bird did not panic. It stepped away, held its distance, and delayed the drop entirely, as if learning that the wrong audience could ruin the entire operation. That was the moment the question changed for Tiago. This was no longer about a bird being clever by accident. It was about whether the bird understood the rules of its environment well enough to exploit them. In scientific terms, that distinction matters. A true strategy doesn't require a human-like mind, but it does demand memory, timing, and the ability to revise behavior when conditions change. And that is exactly what some birds have been shown to do. Crows, ravens, and other intelligent species can solve puzzles, remember faces, and test solutions through trial and error. They may not think in words, but they can learn sequences. They can observe cause and effect. A shell on asphalt is not a mystery to them. It is a problem with a probable answer. Pressure from a tire. A pause in traffic. A safe window to act. In a city built for machines and speed, the bird was reading a different kind of map. Tiago once crouched near the curb and whispered, almost amused, "You really don't need me, do you?" The bird turned its head, one sharp eye fixed on him, then looked back toward the road as if the human question had already been filed away as irrelevant. That was the unsettling part. It wasn't waiting for help. It was waiting for the exact moment the world would work in its favor. And just when Tiago thought he had understood the trick, the bird changed its timing again. By the end of the week, Tiago no longer watched the bird by accident. He planned for it. He arrived early, stood at the edge of the street, and waited as traffic built into its usual rhythm. The bird came exactly as before, hopping with deliberate calm to the same stretch of asphalt, tilting its head, and releasing the nut where the tires would do the work for it. But this time, Tiago noticed something different. The bird did not act the same way after every pass. When the traffic moved too fast, it held back. When the light stayed red a little longer, it grew bolder. It was as if it had read the street like a map. Then came the moment that changed everything. A car rolled over the nut, cracking the shell with a sharp snap. Before the bird could descend, a pedestrian stepped forward, clearly thinking the prize was now easy to steal. The bird froze at a distance, watching. It did not panic. It did not rush. It waited until the person lost interest and walked away. Only then did it glide back down, quick and precise, to claim what the cars had made available. Tiago felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. That was not a reflex. That was adjustment. He had seen enough to know the bird was learning. Not in the grand human sense, not with words or thoughts we could translate neatly, but through observation, repetition, and timing. Each failed attempt seemed to refine its next move. Each near miss taught it something. And in that tiny mind, perched between chaos and opportunity, the city had become a machine it knew how to use. When Tiago finally mentioned it to a friend, the response came fast, almost automatic. "It's just instinct." But Tiago didn't answer right away. He kept thinking about the pauses, the calculations, the way the bird seemed to understand when to wait and when to act. Instinct might explain the first step. It did not explain the patience. It did not explain the adjustment. So what do we call behavior that changes in real time to solve a problem? What do we call a creature that uses traffic, timing, and memory like tools of its own? Tiago never found a simple answer. But after what he saw, he stopped looking at birds as little automatons and started seeing them for what they often are: hidden thinkers, surviving in plain sight. And once you notice that, it becomes almost impossible not to look at the next bird you see a little longer. By the end of the week, Tiago no longer saw the bird as a curious accident on the edge of the road. He saw a repeatable pattern, one shaped by pressure, timing, and patience. The city moved around it in noise and steel, but the bird had learned to read that chaos like a map. It knew when the cars would crush the shell, when the light would change, when the danger had passed. What looked absurd at first had become something far more unsettling. A creature making decisions in real time, adjusting its behavior with each mistake, each near miss, each new obstacle. And that changes everything. Because this is where instinct ends and intelligence begins to blur. Birds are not just reacting to the world. In some cases, they are testing it, remembering it, exploiting it. Studies have shown that certain species can solve problems, use objects as tools, and even modify their approach when conditions change. They do not need to understand asphalt, traffic, or human frustration the way we do. They only need to understand cause and effect. Drop nut. Wait. Watch. Return. Eat. In the language of survival, that is not simplicity. That is precision. Tiago stood there one last afternoon, arms crossed, as the bird returned to the same stretch of road. A driver slowed. The light shifted. The bird waited. Then, with almost insulting calm, it moved forward, claimed its prize, and flew off as if the city itself had simply cooperated. Tiago shook his head and let out a small laugh. "Okay," he muttered, half to himself, half to the bird. "You win." Maybe that is the real surprise. Not that a bird can use a road, but that we still underestimate the minds watching us from above. Intelligence does not always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it comes with feathers, sharp eyes, and a strategy so quiet we mistake it for coincidence. If this story made you look at birds a little differently, leave a like. And tell me, when does behavior stop being instinct and start becoming planning? If you want more strange, real stories about animal intelligence, subscribe now, because the next one is even harder to explain.